You know, I've covered a lot of different topics and situations on this channel, but one thing that I've not covered yet, and one pool of players that will never seem to dry out, will be players who have ruined their own careers. And I want to start a new series today by doing that, taking a look at players who haven't had their careers ruined by injuries or bad luck, but by simply their own actions and stupidity. And today we're going to take a look at the poster boy for this situation, Mario Balotelli. So let's dive in. Mario Baroa, I've definitely said that wrong, was born in Palermo in Italy in August 1990 to Ghanaian immigrant parents. However, when Mario was just 3 years old, he was actually placed into the Italian foster system. This was because his biological parents weren't in a position where they could financially support healthcare needs that the child had. Mario was then adopted by the Balotelli family, his new father, an Italian national, and his new mother, the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Pay attention to that because it will be important later on. Balotelli was always interested in football, and after a failed trial at Barcelona, Balotelli would sign with Inter Milan. His professional debut would come in the 2007 season. He was at an Inter Milan team which was one of the greats. Manager Jose Mourinho and a plethora of world-class players. A great position for the young Italian striker to learn and grow his own trade. And whilst Balotelli wasn't bad at Inter Milan by any means, one thing became clear very early on. Balotelli was a troublemaker. He would be extremely successful at Inter Milan, technically winning the league every single year and picking up a Champions League with them. However, a theme that would stay with Balotelli all through his career, he was constantly clashing with manager Jose Mourinho. There was an incident of him throwing his Inter Milan shirt to the ground after a Champions League match against Barcelona in 2010. He openly displayed his frustration about playing time during the treble-winning season that Inter Milan had in that period, and publicly made comments about wanting to play for AC Milan whilst at Inter Milan.
Not a great plan.
So despite having all of the materials for Balotelli to develop into the next great, he really ruined this for himself. However, he was a teenager, and most teenagers who are given an enormous amount of money turn out to be pricks. But he was just talented enough to make sure that it wouldn't ruin his career entirely. He would leave the club for approximately €30 million in 2010 to sign for Manchester City. A few years after Balotelli left Inter Milan, Jose Mourinho actually gave an interview talking about the player. Mourinho was really happy and spoke back on Balotelli well, but talking about how crazy he could be. Showcasing a Champions League game where Mourinho only had Balotelli available as a striker. He was on a yellow card going into half-time, and Mourinho spent 14 out of 15 minutes allocated at half-time directly only speaking to Balotelli, begging him to keep his cool and not get himself sent off as he had no other strikers available. And 1 minute into the second half, Balotelli walked off with a red card. Balotelli at Manchester City was arguably the best that we've seen of him, but also the worst we've seen of his problems. Managed by an Italian manager, Roberto Mancini, in an elite squad, Balotelli would go on to win the Premier League. He was also teammates with another exceptional striker in Sergio Aguero, so he was given another opportunity to learn and develop alongside a striker who was of a world-class calibre. Now, Aguero was only 2 years older than Balotelli, so Balotelli wasn't being groomed to take on that role from Aguero, but elite clubs don't just have one striker. His first 2 seasons in Manchester would go well. That's when he would win the Premier League, and he scored 27 goals across 60 games. Almost averaging a goal every other game. His numbers on the park certainly weren't bad. His actions off it were. The night before a Manchester derby, Balotelli set fireworks off in his own bathroom. The next morning in the Manchester derby, he would score twice and then lift his shirt up to reveal Under Armour reading "Why Always Me," as if to insinuate that he was being targeted by the media and other people for his reckless actions, which, I mean, come on, you'd set your own house on fire.
What is going on here?
There was reports of lots of training ground issues, including some with reporting that he actually had physical altercations with the manager, Roberto Mancini. His inconsistency and lack of professionalism and focus was a huge issue. And in his last season in Manchester, he would feature 20 times but only score 3 goals, and only once in the league. Now, Balotelli was a large problem. However, fortunately for athletes, even if you are a large problem, so long as you're good enough, there will always be another big team willing to take a chance on you. And despite being a huge problem at his last 2 clubs, Balotelli was about to get chance number 3. At the end of the 2013 season, Balotelli would be sold to AC Milan for €20 million. He finally got the move that he wanted, back to Italy with a great reputation. He was going to be a franchise striker for them. Joining halfway through the 12-13 season, he would play 13 times and score 12 goals, a great start. Going into the next season, in his first full one across 13-14, he would feature 41 times and rack up 24 goal contributions. Numbers wise, this was the best we'd seen of Balotelli. He'd scored 30 goals in 54 games back in Milan. But there was still issues. At this point, Italy was going into what would be a really poor spell of time for the Milan squad. Was lacking investment, it was ageing, and the league was being dominated by Juventus. Balotelli's poor professionalism continued. His work rate was questioned, he was visibly seen sulking on the park during games, constant issues in bookings for dissent, he severely lacked tactical discipline. Balotelli was a great athlete and a brilliant footballer, but a terrible team player and horribly tactically.
You fucking idiot! What? You idiot!
You're joking.
Despite all of this, he would get another chance. This time returning to England with Liverpool for €20 million in the season just as Luis Suarez left. And Balotelli would not impress. He only scored one league goal across this season. Brendan Rodgers spoke openly about constant issues with his professionalism again. There was incidents in a game against Besiktas in the Europa League where he took a penalty away from designated taker Jordan Henderson, only to miss. His pressing and work rate was terrible under Brendan Rodgers, which was the main part of his system, and tactically he was completely disconnected. One of the biggest and most interesting controversies he had whilst at Liverpool though was Balotelli was given a 1-game suspension for something he posted on social media. Balotelli posted a picture of Nintendo video game character Mario, with text that was seen to be racial and anti-Semitic, referencing hurtful tropes about black and Jewish people. This, of course, just doesn't make any sense to me. If you remember back, Balotelli's adopted mother was literally was the daughter of a literal Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, you suck. Yeah, you just fucking suck. Blows my mind that somebody like this not only exists, but also is delusional enough to post it online.
Balotelli's credibility amongst elite clubs was essentially destroyed after his move to Liverpool. He would get a 5th chance to revive it after being loaned back to AC Milan. If Balotelli could re-find his scoring form, he could maybe work his way back into a top team if he properly kept his head down. However, the 15-16 season at Milan was uneventful at best. Balotelli would feature just short of 25 times and only score 3 goals. After that, he'd return to Liverpool and leave on a free transfer, this time moving to France to sign for Nice. Definitely a smaller club compared to what Balotelli was used to, but a club that could potentially get the best out of him. Nice weren't big enough to get drawed down and stuck up on Balotelli's poor disciplinary issues. And honestly, it started to work out. In Balotelli's first season, he featured just shy of 30 times but scored 17 goals. In his second season, he featured just shy of 40 times but scored 26 goals. He was a monster at Nice. He'd finally found his goal scoring form back again. However, there was still issues. He undermined his own redemption arc. He was late for pre-season in 2018, he had constant fitness issues, which isn't his issue, but in January of the 2018-19 season, Balotelli forced a move out of Nice. The only successful period the striker had had since 2014, Balotelli would force a move to another French side in Marseille. Now, although he'd wrecked his own reputation with any fans of Nice, he did have an opportunity. If he could bring his goal-scoring form to Marseille, he would have a chance at another large club to compete directly for trophies again. However, Marseille and Balotelli could not secure a long-term deal and constantly were clashing over contractual issues. This meant, despite scoring 8 goals in 15 appearances for Marseille, Balotelli would leave the club and France altogether for good. Following this, Balotelli would return to Italy. An emotional hometown return to Brescia gave Balotelli a chance to try and bring some of his career back again. However, once again, of all clubs to properly make an arse of it at, he just had to do it again. Balotelli would feature just shy of 20 times and only score 5 goals in a season where Brescia were relegated. However, reports were there of him missing training sessions, he had legal disputes with the club and publicly fell out with them. This was his hometown team.
What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
Balotelli would leave Brescia after just one season, joining a fellow Serie B club Monza. Again, he would barely feature. He didn't even make 15 appearances and only scored 6 goals. By this point, Balotelli was into his 30s. There wasn't one club he'd been at that he hadn't had some sort of fallout with, and there was no set of fans that remembered him overly fondly. So what was next for Balotelli? Well, it was out to Turkey, to Demirspor. A lot of players find themselves going out to Turkey when their career's taking a bit of a dip. And for some players it works, for some players it doesn't. For Balotelli, it definitely worked. His first season at Demirspor seen him rack up 33 appearances and score just under 20 goals. A great season, and then Balotelli had yet another chance to build a good rapport with the club and leave some positive legacy on any team. But he just couldn't help himself, could he? Yet again, Balotelli had a fallout with the manager. Visible frustrations on the park, drama for early substitutions, and going into the next season in 22-23, Balotelli would leave Turkey. This time trying his luck out in Switzerland for Sion. Again, nothing impressive there. He didn't even make 20 appearances and only scored 6 goals. The following season, former Demirspor manager that had been there during Balotelli's first stint had left the club to go manage the Turkish national team. So Balotelli returned to the team, but again he was a bit part player at best. He only featured 16 times across the entire season. He did have 8 goal contributions, so he was averaging a goal contribution every other game. That would be his career in Turkey. He would leave after that to go back to Italy to sign for Genoa. And by the end of the 24-25 season, Balotelli had made 6 appearances and didn't get involved in a single goal. And it looks to be all that she wrote for the Italian striker. He'll be 36 in a few months and he's been without a club since leaving Genoa. He hasn't officially retired, but at this point, does he need to? A Premier League winner, Serie A winner, Champions League winner, and someone who played at the Euros for Italy. Balotelli's a great example of what could have been. He had all the ability in the world, but he didn't have a single ounce of professionalism or pride. He fought with everyone, he betrayed almost everyone, and he wasn't afraid to stab anyone in the back. Former managers and teammates always try to look at the funny side to Balotelli, just because of how ridiculous he was. But he is a strong example of a household name in the footballing world, who did not live up anywhere near to the expectations of what he should have. And that's how it ends. At one point, one of Italy's golden boys, and in the end, a striker with plenty of money, plenty of trophies, and almost no positive affiliation with any fan base.